So it's getting to be that kind of late winter, pre-spawn, not spring yet, but getting close in a lot of parts of the country. And something that I've been playing with in recent years, something that I never threw growing up, honestly. Until I started traveling on the leaks, fishing lakes around the country, I never threw this bait. And as I've kind of fished other places in the country, I've started adding it to my arsenal, especially in that late winter, early springtime. And that is a spinnerbait, but not just any spinnerbait. You say, oh, you've never thrown a spinnerbait. No, I've always thrown a spinnerbait, but I haven't played with the single Colorado thumper style spinnerbait very much. And this is a greenfish tackle, single Colorado spinnerbait, 3/4 ounce. So this is something that, at least in my area, the South, this is huge on a lot of lakes out, you know, Oklahoma and even Texas, some places. It's what people throw. But in kind of my area around here, Lake Hartwell, Clarksville, Greenwood, all these lakes local here, it's just not something that a ton of people do, but it's something I've been playing with and have had a lot of success with. When it comes to the specific spinnerbait I throw, I generally throw the greenfish tackle ones. I get them to tie them and make them for me. And I like really two sizes. I pretty much throw a 3/4 ounce almost all the time. Sometimes I'll go up to a 1 ounce if I want to be able to fish it a little quicker or get it a little deeper. But the 3/4 ounce head, it seems like the best. And what you can do, you can just vary your blade size to get it to maybe where you can reel it a little faster or make it thump harder or whatever you want to do. I just can cast the 3/4 ounce a lot better than I can throw that 1 ounce. The 1 ounce is really heavy and it's a little more difficult to cast. But when it comes to these spinnerbaits, I fish them with a similar setup that I fish most spinnerbaits, but I kind of fish it in a little bit different way. What I mean by that is a spinnerbait a lot of times just kind of a cover water, go down the bank type bait. You know, you might just throw it just like you would a crankbait or whatever, run down the bank. But with a spinnerbait, especially this Colorado spinnerbait, I really like to make short, very precise casts with a spinnerbait. I'd almost say almost like pitching. Like the same places I'd fish a jig or something like that, I really like to throw this Colorado blade spinnerbait in that colder water. It really seems like it shines to me, and really as cold as you want, as long as the water's a little dirty. But I mean, upper 40s, which is about all it gets around here. Upper 40s, you know, low 50s, up to around 58, 60 degrees until they get ready to spawn is when this bait really shines. And this is a white one. I throw white quite often. What I'll do is I'll kind of change my trailer, whether I put a chartreuse one or a different color one or just a white one. But I do carry two colors. I carry chartreuse and white and then just straight white. And I've put my trailer to kind of match it, or if I want to add a little chartreuse without the whole bait being chartreuse, I'll put a chartreuse swim bait on this white spinnerbait just to kind of change it up a little bit. But the only two colors I carry in the 3/4 and 1 ounce. When it comes to trailer on this spinnerbait, I'll talk more about how and where to fish it in a second, but we'll get your spinnerbait set up first. So generally, I throw a gold blade. I just like the gold. This is a dirty water bait, and I always think gold works a little bit better in those dirty water situations. So generally throw a gold blade, and like I said, I carry some other blades. I vary my sizes. I'm not really a connoisseur on the exact size types. I don't know, but I just go a little smaller if I want it to run a little deeper, run a little faster. I go a little bigger if I want it to run a little slower or thump a little harder. So just change my blade type on that 3/4. But with this spinnerbait, the one thing I do a little bit differently is most spinnerbaits I use a Zoom split tail trailer, you know, your typical spinnerbait trailer. But on these thumper spinnerbaits, these single Colorados, I almost always use a swim bait. This is something that I've just played with the different sizes, and I've came to generally throwing the 3.8 inch Zoom Z-Swim swim bait. And it's just a good size on this bait. You could get away with bigger, but I like this 3.8 inch because they usually get it pretty well. Still a big profile, but not crazy big. So I put this swim bait on. I'm not gonna tear up my swim bait. I'm getting low on these, but put this swim bait on this spinnerbait to give it a little bit bigger profile and give it even more thump, because that swim bait kicks a little bit and it makes it plane really well. If you have too long on an arm on some of these spinnerbaits, it doesn't want to run right. It'll kind of like flip over, spin in circles. This swim bait helps it plane a little bit, and this greenfish tackle one runs pretty true, but sometimes if you put a real big blade, you kind of have to play with it to get it to plane straight. You always want it to be straight up and down, keep that big blade above the swim bait and the skirt, because if it's not, a lot of times with this big blade especially, the fish will only eat the blade. I actually had a situation in the Classic last year. I was catching some fish on this and spinnerbait got a little mangled up and I was lazy and didn't change it, and I had a fish just slackline eat the whole spinnerbait and pulled, and my whole blade was gone. He actually ate the blade and pulled the blade off, because probably laziness on my part, not changing it and not getting my spinnerbait tweaked back to be running perfectly. You always want them run perfect 90 degrees. But so when it comes to the setup on this, I'm going to tell you the setup first, because the setup's, in my mind, essential for being able to present this bait right, which I'll talk about in a second. So the setup on this, I use my buzz burner rod. And what this is a 7-1 heavy, so it can handle these slightly heavier baits. It's rated up to 1 1/4 ounce, so that 3/4 and 1 ounce does not feel too heavy on this rod. But it's not that long. It's a 7-1 heavy, and it's fast, not extra fast. So that kind of softer tip lets the fish get that spinnerbait real well, and the heavy action allows you to present that heavy bait. And I like the 7-1 length because I can kind of roll cast it and get it in tight places. But this rod and the G7 reel really allows me to put it where I need to get more bites on that spinnerbait. And I use heavy line. If you're throwing the spinnerbait, the water's generally dirty. This is not a clear water bait. It's a dirty to stain, well, extremely muddy to stain water bait. And the line, so it doesn't matter. And if you get too light a line, you'll actually break your line casting that heavy bait a lot, and you're usually throwing around heavy cover. So you want to use, in my opinion, minimum of 20-pound test. Use 20-pound fluorocarbon on that, and the setup really makes a difference, because when it comes to this, you know, it's a relatively, it's a large bait, has a lot of thump, but it's kind of a compact profile, and I like that kind of compact shape because it allows you to really get it in tight places. The way I fish this bait, like I said, it's a lot like the same places I'd throw a jig. You know, in that cold water pre-spawn, fish aren't gonna go very far, and they get really, really tight to cover. So this is one of my favorite things for like fishing docks. I'll actually go around the dock and make really tight casts, kind of roll casting, underhand pitching this spinnerbait, really short casts to every single piece of cover I think a fish may be on, whether it's, you know, rocks on a bluff bank where I can crawl it down those rocks, whether it's poles on a dock, a lay down. You really can creep this around everything, and that slow thump is what really gets these fish to bite. And it's some of the coolest bites you'll ever get, because they really, really eat this bait when they eat it. It's just, usually they get the whole bait way in their mouth, and it slacklines it when they eat it. It's really, really, really fun bait to throw. But it's a dirty water bait for sure, without a doubt. So when you're presenting it around these tight places, you know, I said you're making these really, really short casts. So it's not like a normal spinnerbait where you just throw it and reel it. I pitch at these places, and generally I fish it very close to the bottom. You don't want to drag the bottom, because then the blade doesn't thump appropriately if you're reeling it too slow. But I get it just to where I can feel the blade thumping and kind of creep it by these places. You're making a really short cast, so you don't want it moving fast. And I creep it by these likely places. I mean, I might make 30 casts on one dock. It doesn't take but, you know, 2 minutes. But as I go around making these short casts and creeping it by every single pole. And I always give it a flutter when it comes by these poles. That big single Colorado really like kicks when you flutter it and make it do something different. A lot of your bites will come then. But it is actually incredible how much in that pre-spawn cold water, I think the fish eat a lot of big gizzard shad, which is what this is imitating on a lot of lakes. And it's actually incredible how many more bites often you'll get on this big spinnerbait than say a jig, where you'd pitch it to those poles, pitch it to that cover. The spinnerbait's a moving shad type presentation rather than a crawfish. And you creep it by those poles and get some of the coolest bites you'll get all year, and it catches giant fish. Most of the fish you catch on this are gonna be the bigger fish in the lake. It's a good way to not get a ton of bites, but target those larger pre-spawn female fish. But the right setup really, really makes a difference, because you want to be able to present it quietly, you know, in tight places without hitting the dock and bending your frame or getting in there. You need to be able to get those fish out, so use that heavy line. It makes a really, really big difference. But this is a bait that it's probably the time of year in your part of the country to be doing it, and we've had a little bit of rain lately, enough to keep some places dirty. I've definitely been having some success on this lately, and you can catch some of the biggest fish all year on a spinnerbait. Spinnerbait's something a lot of people have confidence in, but I don't know how many people throw these thumper type spinnerbaits, and it's something that I didn't do much up till the last couple years, but I've been having a lot of fun doing it, and it's one of the coolest bites you'll get. So go check it out, Greenfish Tackle Spinnerbait. get you some 3.8 inch zoom swim baits, put that swim bait on it, and go catch you a big old bass.